Hi, I'm Kitty and you're watching a live stream for the Festival of Nature 2021. And I think it's fair to say that I've been very excited about this particular live event. I'm going to be joined by some of Bristol's finest residents and ones of the long-necked variety. They are the tallest terrestrial mammal on the planet. They have iconic patterned coats and fascinating ways of thermoregulating in hot climates. But they're also creatures under threat due to habitat loss, poaching, civil unrest, climate change, and a plethora of other factors. So I'd like to welcome to the screen the giraffes of Wild Place and animal team leader, Joe Norman.
Hello.
Hello, how's it going?
Yeah, really well, thank you.
So who have we got in the background?
So you can see behind us, we've got our 3 male giraffe here at Wild Place. So the one closest to us is called Ben. We've got Deo in the middle, and we've got Tico, our youngest giraffe, at the back.
And they're snacking on something at the moment.
Yep, so just to keep their attention, so hopefully they'll stick around for the duration of this video, I've given them a lovely big bunch of ash. They'll eat all sorts of different types of leaves, but ash is definitely a favourite.
So I'm right in thinking you're at the Benaway National Park exhibit at the Wild Place project at the moment. Talk to me a bit about where you are and what you can see around you.
Yeah, so this is our Benaway exhibit. The idea of having an area which is called Benaway is that the Bristol Zoological Society does have a conservation project in Benaway National Park in Cameroon. In Cameroon, we worked with local people to work towards saving the Kordofan giraffe. So giraffe are split up into 9 different subspecies. Behind me are the reticulated giraffe, but the ones that we're working with in the wild are actually called Kordofan giraffe. The idea is that people come to Wild Place, we call this an area, we really highlight the plight of the Benaway National Park, and it's got a few other residents, including, I don't know if you can see behind me, we've got our plain zebra, our pair of eland, and there may be some red river hogs in the background.
Oh, excellent. That's incredible. I wish I was there. So I think what we're going to do now for a short while is pass over to Joe while he feeds them and gets a bit closer to Ben, Deo and Tico. And I'll be back on the screen in just a while to find out some more about these magnificent animals. But if you're watching this live, please feel free to put any questions you might have for Joe in the comments and we'll see if we can get round to them. But for now, over to you, Joe.
Thank you. So yeah, like we just said, so welcome to our 3 amazing giraffes here at the Wild Place project. As I already said, we've got 3 male giraffes. We don't currently have any females here at Wild Place, which is quite often asked, how are they helping conservation? But these are 3 giraffes to highlight the plight of giraffe generally in Africa. There's currently estimated to be around 80,000 giraffes living wild in Africa, which is such a small number. So just coming to Wild Place to see these amazing animals behind me really does just inspire people and obviously help to bring their issues to everyone's attention, and hopefully we can do a little bit to help them out in the wild. As well as people coming and visiting here, the gate money goes towards looking after the amazing animals behind us, but also to our conservation project in Cameroon, like we were just saying, in the Benaway National Park. So people that visit Wild Place really do directly help our wild counterparts of these giraffes. So we really do welcome everyone to come and see these amazing boys, as well as helping those out in the wild. As you just said, we do have Ben, Tico and Deo. They're 3, 5 and 6 years old. They're not currently fully grown. When they're fully grown, they can expect to reach heights of about 5 meters. So around the exhibit, we've got various feeding areas which are really high up to try and make them stretch that really long neck, which obviously mimics their natural feeding behavior, which is browsing. So browsing is just them eating leaves in layman's terms. To help them eat those leaves, they've got an amazing 45 centimeter prehensile tongue. So as you can probably see behind me, when they're sticking their head in the bushes or the trees, what they're actually using to get the leaves is their amazing tongue. If you think of species such as goats, they use their teeth to pluck the leaves off of a branch, but giraffes have evolved in such a way that actually their tongue is like a Swiss Army knife, and actually it does all of the hard work of plucking off the leaves from the different trees. In the wild, they can eat over 100 different species of tree, and in the wild, they can also eat around 34 kilos of leaves a day. That's really quite hard to mimic in captivity. So what we do is we try and provide them with as much as possible in terms of browse. So that, like I said earlier, their favourite is ash. We also give them willow, hawthorn, pretty much anything we can get our hands on. And as well as that, we do feed them something called lucerne. So they've always got something to eat, which is really important for a browsing animal because, of course, they spend most of the time in the wild eating. So if we can try and mimic that in captivity, it really does benefit them greatly because they're entertained, if nothing else. If you've visited Wild Place before, you may have seen various feeding devices which we hang up for our giraffes. We quite often use things like drain pipes, anything that we have to kind of make them work for their food. So what we do have to give them is pellet. Like I was saying, they cannot just eat leaves in Bristol. We do have to give them a concentrated pellet. The pellet we use is full of a lot of acacia. Acacia is the tree that they eat most in the wild, so it's actually as natural as possible. But of course, if we just put pellet in a bucket, there's no effort whatsoever for them to eat it. So what we do is we make feeding devices, such as, like I just said, the drain pipes, and that means they have to put their tongue into the device and pluck out one piece of pellet at a time, and it really does just make them feeding last that little bit longer. If you look towards their tops of their heads, so a lot of people ask us, have they got horns? But interestingly, giraffes have what we call ossicones. Ossicones are the giraffe equivalent to a horn. This doesn't break off like an antler. It does just stick with them for their entire life. And as the males get bigger, their ossicones have calcium buildups. So if you see a really old bull giraffe, quite often he's got absolutely massive ossicones and lumps on his head. And that is what they use to defend their territories. So if you've ever seen giraffe fighting, they quite often spar by necking each other. So that's going towards each other and actually smashing their head into each other's necks. And that's their way of saying, kind of, I'm the king of this area, this is my tree, this is my female. So as they get older, our boys will start to get bigger bumps on their heads. And actually, because they are kind of teenagers at the moment, our giraffes do spend a lot of time jousting and necking, which is completely natural. And this is what they would do in the wild to assert a certain hierarchy. So it's great to see that they still do that, even though they're here at Bristol. Also in their exhibit, so they are a herd animal, and of course in the wild there'd be lots of giraffe living in a group of giraffes, which is called a tower of giraffes. But here we've got just the three, but they are joined in their Wild Place herd by our 3 plains zebras. So I don't know if you can see behind me, we've currently got a male and a female called Florence and Peter. And last year we were really lucky to have a foal called Vera. Vera is nearly fully grown and is causing mischief, as all good young horses do. And we are hoping that actually Florence is going to give birth again this year. So actually our herd is ever growing, which is great to see. On a daily basis, we mix our zebras and the eland with our giraffes. So this gives them more space, they're able to interact. And quite often the giraffes spill their food everywhere because they don't really look at the ground. Once the food's gone from their feeding device or if it's fallen down, they won't really mess with it at all. But then we let the zebra and eland in and they come and clear up the floor for us. So actually they are doing us keepers a great job in just keeping the floor clear of any food. The other species that does live in here also is the Red River hog. The Red River hogs, again, get mixed with our giraffe on a daily basis. So quite often, if visitors come to Wild Place, you might see the Red River hogs in the main giraffe house, snuffling around in the sand, and again, picking up all the food that the giraffes do drop.
Great. So Joe, what kind of... Can you hear me, Joe?
Yeah, sorry.
What kind of thing do they need in their enclosures, as well as food source and all these high up places to reach? What else do they need so far as an ideal place to live?
So, in an ideal place to live, of course, we would have the African temperatures, which today, thankfully, we do have. But during the winter months, when it is quite cold, our giraffes don't really like going outside because, to be honest with you, they're wimps. And actually, they would much prefer a nice heated barn or a big area inside. So what we do have here at Wild Place is a big indoor heated house. In there, we've got a large area which is filled with different feeding devices, lots of room for them to move around. So when the weather is typical Bristol weather, which is usually rain and drizzle, they're quite often in the house, either just sticking their head out because they love to keep an eye out to watch what's going on around them. So it's great that they're able to kind of pick. In the summer months, they spend a lot of time outside here. We've got a really nice area of hard substrate, so that's the gravel which you can see we're stood on. This is really good for wearing their hooves. So giraffes are a hoofed animal. As you can see, they've got almost like 2 claws, and it's really important that the substrate that they're walking on helps to kind of rub them down and just keep them in tip-top condition. Because if they were on substrate that was really quite soft, they'd be really prone to overgrown hooves, and that would involve using hoof care as a way of kind of counteracting that. But luckily at the moment we are relying on the substrate to do that for us. In the house there's a thick layer of sand, which does seem a bit weird because of course they're not from a beach, but the reason for the sand is that it's a really good substrate for them to sit on. So even on a hot day like today, we've got a sand pit outside and they will just sit in the sun, luckily where the visitors can see them, and that's just a softer area for them to go on. As well as that, we've got an area which is the grass, which if you can see behind me, there's a couple of trees that are still there, but you can see where the giraffes can reach and where they cannot, because of course they do eat everything they can possibly reach, which then just means we have to provide them with as many trees as possible, so branches from around site, which we try to do.
And what about water? Do they drink a lot? I've seen pictures of them kind of clumsily bending down. They seem to have a fascinating way of drinking.
Yeah, so giraffe, of course, do drink from the floor like every other animal, but we are quite nice to our giraffes, and inside there's quite a lot of elevated water drinkers just to make their lives a little bit easier. But you're right, what they do when they're outside, so we do have a water hole over at the far side by the on the grass, and what they do is they lean all the way down to the floor, and then to bring themselves back up, all their muscles contract and they almost spring back in an elastic way, which is, yeah, like you say, quite a funny thing to see. But on days when they're out on the grass, they are quite often doing that because, of course, they do get thirsty.
And when you talked about these little horn type sort of structures, conical structures on their heads called ossicones, what are they made of? Are they bone or cartilage? This is a question from the public.
So it's a kind of a weird mix, but it's mostly cartilage. And then as the bumps start to, so the extra horns, if you like, start to build up, that's calcium deposits. So when they're born, if you've ever seen a baby giraffe, they do actually have the ossicones on their head. But when they're born, they're actually quite floppy. And then when they start to mature, they harden up. And then over time, as they mature, the calcium deposits build up on top of their head. And that's what it's predominantly made out of. But it is a keratin substance originally.
Amazing. So also another question about the fact that they're so tall and they've got such long legs. How do they sleep and lie down? Is it a bit of a palaver for them to get up and down for that? Or do they sleep standing up?
So giraffe have quite a weird or funny sleeping pattern in that they sleep little and often. So if they were in the wild, they'd be, of course, at the mercy of predators. They couldn't just lay down like us for 8 hours in the evening because the pride of lions would dive on them and that would be the end of the giraffe. So what they have to do is be opportunistic and sleep little and often. And actually it can be anywhere between 20 minutes to an hour at a time. And then they'd be up again ready to kind of mooch off or keep an eye out for predators. One of the benefits of living in a herd is that you always sort of have someone on lookout. So there's times when they're able to rest a lot more. Of course, here at Wild Place, we don't have predators. So actually, if you do come, you might sometimes see all 3 of them sat down and resting, which is completely normal because they feel safe. If we suddenly let a lion out, they potentially might, stand up. But they have REM sleep the same as us. So the theory is that they do actually dream the same as us. And the only way you know that they've gone into their REM sleep is when their head completely gives way and they actually rest their head on their back. So if you ever see a giraffe with its head completely slouched on its behind, it's quite often dreaming, which I can only imagine is about leaves.
Fascinating. So someone else has just commented saying that she's spotted in the background 2 giraffes rubbing their necks together. Is that an act of affection or is that something else?
So our giraffe at the moment are in the teenage stage of their life, really. So they're adolescents, which means that they will go through all the motions of kind of training, if you like, to be a bull giraffe, sorry. So actually them necking, so rubbing their necks together, it's just kind of play fighting to a degree. They won't go as far as to really causing each other damage, but it's just them sizing each other up. Because we currently don't have any females, there's not a lot really for them to compete over in our exhibit, but they will have a hierarchy where one maybe is more dominant over the other and maybe kind of pushes the other ones around. But to be honest, it's quite fluid. Some days Deo is in charge, some days Ben, and even sometimes Tico, who is the youngest, smallest giraffe. So it really just depends on what the day is.
And when it comes to giraffes in the wild, you talk about a tower of giraffes, which is such a cool expression. Are they quite varied groups? Are they mixed gender, like mixed sexes, or do they tend to be female only, male only groups?
So predominantly you would find a bull, keep wanting to say elephant, sorry, a bull giraffe, which would have his females, and then there would be the offspring of said group. And then once the males start to mature, they would get pushed out of that group, and then they may go off as a kind of a small bachelor group. So it's not completely unnatural that we've got our 3 males together, because potentially these 3 could have all been born in the same year, and they've just been kicked away by dad to go and fend for yourself, and then they'll go off and hopefully find their own harem of females. So actually, in the wild, it could be breeding harems, if you like, in a larger herd. But predominantly it is the breeding male, his females, and their offspring.
So it's very much a case of a male and lots of females rather than a pair that pairs up for a long period of time or anything like that.
Yeah, and quite
interesting.
Often the males kind of change. So if there was a big group of females with a dominant bull, quite often that bull could be challenged by another animal, another big bull giraffe, and pushed away, and then that also helps with just genetics, so you don't end up with so many related giraffes, because the male is quite often changing.
Wow, that's so interesting. And what about their actual, their senses, their hearing, their eyesight, things like that? Do they have strong hearing and eyesight, or do they rely on things like smell?
So giraffes have amazing hearing, and actually they hear a much lower decibel than we do. So quite often they will all stare in one direction, and there's no audible sound to us, but they can hear something. And that's just because they're so, as a prey animal, they have to be so in tune with their environment. And quite often they might hear something before they see it. And of course, they've got amazing eyesight. Just appreciate how big their eye is in comparison to their bodies. So when they're stood up looking across the savannah, if they're in the wild or here at Wild Place, they've got a really good view, which is really important for predators such as lions or hyenas.
And they have these incredible eyelashes, which almost seem cartoon. What are they for?
So they could be quite often found in arid places, which of course means it's quite dusty. So they work in the same sort of way as maybe a camel. So if it was really dusty and there was lots of even sand blowing around, then it would protect their eyes from such sandstorms or dust storms.
Amazing. And talk to me a bit about their coats. They obviously have this incredible pattern coat. Is that just a case of camouflage, or has that got other uses as well?
So you could think it was camouflage, but to be honest, a male giraffe could be up to 5 meters tall, and quite often, they're not going to find too many places that they can hide in. So I guess maybe in kind of, if they were running away from a predator and they were all moving at the same time, the pattern could kind of confuse the predator. So it might work in that way. But actually, what we found most recently is that it helps with thermal regulation. So the darker areas actually release a lot more heat than the striped lighter patches. So if you had a thermal imaging camera, you can actually see the perfect pattern, because the different parts of them release different amounts of heat, which help when you're in such a big area where they might not be able to find shade. And of course, they travel such large distances.
And that is absolutely incredible that you could develop, they've evolved to have a coat that helps them with thermoregulating. Wow. So I guess they're normally found in really hot locations. Whereabouts would they be found in Africa, and how else are their bodies designed to kind of cope with the heat, the different conditions?
So reticulated giraffes, so the 3 behind me, are actually found predominantly in Kenya. And of course, it is absolutely baking in the day. But what we quite often forget is actually in the evening, it does get relatively cold. So when people ask, is our weather suitable to them? Actually, they can go down to quite cold temperatures during the evening. So our weather is sort of a very good in-between, where they're quite in a comfortable temperature, if you like. But in terms of keeping themselves cool, so they will just seek out a lot of shade if they were out wandering. So our giraffes quite often you might find them in the shade of the trees, or they might be still in the house but with their head sticking out because they don't want to be in the midday sun for too long. Or to be honest, sometimes they do like to sunbathe, so sometimes they'll just sit in the blaring heat, and then when they've had enough, they go in. Yeah,
and when it comes to, you talked a bit about the fact that there are I think you said about 80,000 giraffes in the wild in the world, which is, a really surprisingly low number. What kind of conservation status do they have? Are they severely threatened at the moment?
So because they're split up into different subspecies, so all different giraffes have a different level of being endangered, but they are very much all at risk of becoming extinct, which is obviously a massive shame, because when you think of Africa and you think of big animals, it's always the elephants and the giraffes. So actually, for them to have such a low number, it's not a very nice story. But hopefully, having them at places like the Wild Place Project and just inspiring people by seeing them, we can just do our little bit to help promote them in the wild.
Absolutely. And what kind of challenges are they up against? It seems to be like there are many things. What are the main issues that they have?
So the main issues in Benue National Park are things like habitat loss. So when we say habitat loss, that doesn't necessarily mean just deforestation. It's actually when areas of the wild or savanna are turned into farmland, because of course people live in these countries. It's not just an animal place, it's got a human population as well that tries to live side by side. But of course people are a growing species. We've got a population that's booming everywhere. And that just means that we need more food, which means we need more farmland. So quite often farmers in Benue will kind of fence off an area, give it over to their cattle. But also what they might do is they might find a small area of woodland or trees, and they will cut that down, because then the leaves fall to the ground, they can feed their cattle, and then of course move on to the next part. But what that does is it removes a tree that would have grown back over time to feed the giraffes. The giraffes wouldn't have stripped it completely, which has a massive effect. Also poaching. Poaching is a massive problem for our giraffe. The biggest problem they have is that they're so big. And if you think of developing countries, if you are genuinely finding bushmeat to feed your family, if you saw a giraffe, it's an absolutely massive animal. And if you were to hunt an animal to feed your family, to sell the meat, they're actually a massive prime target, much rather than the smaller animals. So really the main problems are the poaching and the habitat loss. But also on top of that, there are things like illegal mining. So quite often areas are deforested, all the natural resources used up, and then another company comes in and digs it up for the mineral deposits. So of course that then cannot grow back into habitat for any animal really. So they're getting it from all sides.
My goodness, that sounds so complicated as an issue. And I guess there seems to be two lines of attack against this decline. One seems to be having these animals in captivity like you're doing there, and supporting the population that way. And one seems to be stuff going on in the wild as well, which is really interesting. How interrelated are those two conservation efforts?
So the idea of our conservation project in Cameroon isn't just to send money and kind of that is it. The idea of working with the Cameroon people in Benue is that we are working towards training eco guards. So the idea is that if we can gather money, fundraise to employ people to work in Benue, they can survey the area, they feel a bit more of ownership maybe over the animals and really get a bit more involved. So that way we can kind of directly help, because if there's people on the ground caring about the area, not only does it help giraffes, but it helps the other species such as hippos. Lots of different animals live in Benue. So our money isn't just sent off in an envelope. Actually, we do try and train the eco guards as well. We provide them with things like drones, which have been recently used to survey much greater areas because people can only walk so far. So using drones really just increases the amount of space that we can survey. But also using things like camera traps. At Bristol Zoological Society, we've got a huge research department, which actually we utilise the students and the resources they have, which is to study the areas, to look at the pictures from camera traps. So it is all completely intertwined and completely dependent on people coming to the Wild Place to look at our giraffes and help us fundraise as much as possible.
That's incredible. It's amazing to hear of how it's all linked up. And are they animals that we're still learning about? Like, is there a certain element of, you're still studying the creatures you've got there and learning more about them and how to help them?
Yeah, so actually in the wild and here, so we have a number of different students that carry out projects at both sites, so Wild Place Project and Bristol Zoo, but also there's always, so using camera traps, we're always seeing different animals that may be moving into the Benue National Park that maybe we didn't know about before, which just kind of enriches the idea and shows how many more animals are protected by saving just the one, because they, of course, are all intertwined.
Incredible. So what are they up to in the background at the moment? I can't quite see. Are they
So we've
mooching
got
about?
Deo is currently in the house, looking out, like I said earlier. So maybe he's got a bit warm. So now he's just decided to keep a lookout, but stay in the pool. And then we've got Ben and Tico, which look like they're probably waiting for their next meal, which will be my next job.
Oh, well, we know that you've got your hands full there, but thank you so much. I mean, what a wonderful insight into the lives of such majestic creatures. And it's amazing to hear about the kind of balancing act of safeguarding a population and human care alongside a sustainable population in the wild as two different but equally important means of conservation. So thanks so much, Joe. And I believe Wild Place is open to the public, to visitors now. Is that right?
Yeah. So please come, bring all your friends, family, everybody.
Excellent. So check out more on their website, and which is you can find on the banner just below. Thank you so much, Joe, and thanks to all the giraffes.
Thank you.